Hello everyone! Today I am going to be reviewing the aptly named debut record by Icelandic sensation Björk. As I said, this album is called Debut and it was released on July 5th, 1993, which means it is a special year for this record as it is turning 25 years old this summer. I mean, this is also around the same time that I was born, just several months after, so the fact that it was the album that did start Björk's actual career and the fact that it started when I was born is always kind of a cool thing for me to think about, since she's one of my favorite artists. And Björk has sort of retroactively stated that she doesn't feel like this is her strongest work, and I am sort of more inclined to believe her. I didn't really gravitate towards this album as heavily as I did other records of hers. I really do feel like in this album she's just laying the groundwork and the foundation. What this album is most significant about is its trend-setting appeal in the mass pop culture, especially in the UK and in Europe. It's sort of caught on in the US, but the reviews in the US were a lot more sort of on the fence than they were in the UK. Just one of the reasons why the US just can't have nice things, right? We always are going to be not as into music that is as experimental as this. This album did phenomenally well on the charts, especially in the UK, and so it really did burst her into the mainstream in a way that I don't think she was ever expecting to do. She produced some of this album herself, along with Nellie Hopper, who did a lot of the production that she did, but she was working with a lot of different people at the time. There were a lot of scrapped ideas and other producers that she had with a little bit more of a jazz influence. She collaborates with Oliver Lake, who plays the saxophone in a few of the tracks. And in terms of genre of music, it can be considered an electropop album, but house music, and specifically acid house or club music, is sort of the sphere and focus of Björk's interest when she's creating this record. You know, the Sugar Cubes was like alternative punk rock, and she never really felt like that was her lane. She was always kind of composing in her head these more sort of like almost pop songs, but they were more dance pop and a little bit more electronic based, and she never really felt like she could do them, obviously, with the Sugar Cubes. So she already had a lot of songs, like for instance Human Behavior she had started working on as a teenager. She had already had a bunch of songs in the back of her mind, so putting together this album in the last few years before its release was sort of more like a gathering process and giving new life and real pop sounds to ideas that she'd had for quite some time. There is also a slight jazz influence that you see in this record and also in Post to some degree. I am not a huge jazz fan, but I don't mind the hints of it that are put into the sort of scope of this album's genre. I don't find it to be too overtly jazz. I don't hear it too strongly. Mostly, we have techno, electro house, acid house, ambient, trip hop, and some world and jungle music thrown in, with also a little bit of that traditional four-on-the-floor house music that was so popular at the time, which was, of course, also becoming a huge scene in the underground culture of Europe, especially in the early 90s, late 80s. Now, opening up this record, we have Human Behavior, which is one of her more iconic songs, more so in statement than I think in sound, although I do think the melody is quite memorable. It's told from the perspective of an animal or some sort of explorer who is not of the human species, who is examining us as if David Attenborough is talking about us in a nature program. She was really inspired by David Attenborough, and she's always been a lifelong fan of his, as she actually recruited him to do some narration for her biophilia project. And she was inspired to make a song about, you know, if you ever get close to a human, prepare to be very confused. There is no map, and a compass won't help at all to understand human behavior. And I always was drawn to the sentiment of this song, is Björk is speaking from the perspective of someone who really does feel like an outcast, who really never understood why people in society as a mass do things the way they do. And I've always felt like when I listened to this song for the first time and the lyrics, I was just so on board with it. For some reason, the timpani, which is the instrument that's used as part of the sort of rhythmic backing and production of this song, it always reminds me of like a rolling motor vehicle kind of going through like a jungle or like a wetland, and like maybe a little bit like more kind of like old school sounding. And I think that's just a really interesting sort of added layer to the sort of whole safari, like, look at these creatures in the zoo, you know, sort of feel that it has. It's like, look at these humans and how weird they are. Let's drive through their habitat. So I always loved that. The music video, which is directed by Michel Gondry, this is the first time she recruits him for a music video, which she subsequently does a ton of. They're a very good duo. Is so playful and witty and smart, and of course it's dated, but you know, at the same time I kind of like that it's so dated. You know, she's in this cabin, she's taking off in this little astronaut uniform, there's this bear chasing her through a woods. It's very folksy in terms of aesthetic, and I think it fits a little bit more of the girl from the wilderness vibe than it does the girl who moved to London and was surrounded by the city, which a lot of the rest of this album actually harkens more towards. I think Human Behavior is one of the few songs that's sort of speaking more to her roots and more to a girl who wants to live in a cabin in the forest and wants to observe from the outside rather than be within the whole craziness that is the city. Because on the next track, Crying, that is what that song is about. Now, the acid house, trippy electropop spaciness of this song is counterintuitive to the lyrics, which are very mournful and melancholy. It's very depressing and yet so uplifting. I travel all around the city, go in and out of locomotives all alone. It's a really poignant sort of thing to understand, especially as a pop star, but also just as someone living in the city. Just because you're around people all of the time, it does not make you necessarily feel more connected. It sometimes can actually make you feel more alone than if you were actually isolated in an actual isolated environment. At least for me, I found this. I've lived in the city and I've also lived out of the city, and I noticed that sometimes being all around the hustle and bustle of it doesn't necessarily make you feel less lonely. There's no one here, and yet there's people everywhere. Crying because I need you, crying I can feel you, I need you because I care. It's a hot day and I'm dressed lightly. I move carefully through the crowd. Here everyone is so vulnerable, and I'm as well. Only if a ship would sail in, or just somebody came and knocked at my door, or just something. There's this fervent, aggressive sort of frustration that, you know, I think if you're feeling stagnant and you're feeling lonely, these emotions boil up, and I would understand it completely. I mean, again, I feel these lyrics so strongly. Björk is an introvert, even though she has so many extroverted tendencies, and I think at this point in her life, she was really trying to live that extroverted life. I mean, the mid-90s was when she was all about, like, London and city and the big kind of craziness of it. And she's always been into club culture. That's just been a fetish of hers for quite some time. But she was going at it in a much more extroverted approach this time around. And I think that this is sort of the symptom of realizing, you know, she wrote this song realizing that this was not necessarily what she wanted all along. She still was dealing with some loneliness, some introverted pangs and confusion and existential confusion as well. And of course, romance too. Who do I impress here? Who's looking at me, if anyone? And what do I do to attract people to me? Venus as a Boy is my favorite song on this album. I actually think it's stronger than Human Behavior, even though Venus as a Boy did not chart as high. Venus as a Boy is very Bollywood inspired. She was very inspired by India, traditional and pop music. Obviously, the Bollywood strings are very recognizable in this song, as well as in Come to Me as well. You can hear them. She had befriended a lot of Indian people in London, as there are quite a few. And so that sort of led her to being more interested in the culture. Venus as a Boy is about a relationship that was blossoming that she had with Dominic Thrupp. Venus as a Boy is a very sensual song, using a lot of big grand allegories to describe a blossoming romance. His wicked sense of humor suggests exciting sex. One of the most transparent lyrics ever. His fingers, they focus on her touches. He's Venus as a boy. As we know, Venus is a female figure. So to describe Venus in a male form proves that love took on such a sensual, masculine approach this time around. That love was all coming from Dominic, not so much from her, and she was falling to the beguiling nature of it. He's exploring the taste of her, arousal so accurate. This is the beginnings of that beautifully crafted poetic and erotic songwriting that she explores so much more down the road on Utopia, on Vespertine. It's something that even post, we see the progression. And so I view Venus as a Boy as a really important moment for her jumping off into love songs that are not cheesy, but are extremely explicit, but appropriately so. They never feel voyeuristic, or they never feel shocking in some ways. Maybe because we just know Björk and we come to expect her to be explicit, but This is the perfect launching pad to creating the sounds and style of music that is a little bit more ambient, that's more airy, that's not so percussive. And Venus as a Boy, with that Eastern flair and with the Bollywood strings, is such a perfect example of it. And it still is a magnificent pop song with a beautiful, undeniable hook and catch to it. So it's one of my favorites for all of these reasons. There's More to Life Than This is a unique song in Björk's catalog, is that it is literally about, I love the description on Wikipedia, it's about a party that Björk attended and then promptly left. Let that be, for the record, every single description of a party that Arthur DeVille ever attended in his life. Arthur attended this party and he promptly left. I just love that how it succinctly described that situation. And you can tell the frustration she has in the very kind of humorous lyrics to this song. How I'd rather have a party by myself. And there's more to life than this, noisy, sweaty, dark club that I'm in. She sings about her getting her own little ghetto blaster, which was slang for a boombox back then. It's not really a term anyone uses anymore, which makes this song so much more hilarious, I think. And how she would rather just go by the harbor and have a nice moment by herself or with someone else. The classic introvert in an extroverted setting. And so I think it's an important integral moment to where we get to really know Björk's sensibilities towards the London culture that she was immersed within. It almost sounds like she's actually just sort of singing a cappella her own song, and then in the background is this very traditional four on the floor acid house track that is almost like a featured artist, like someone else. It's just the music that's playing in the club, and she's sort of taking the beat and she's running with it and turning it into her own song, and then you hear her leave. You hear the door slam, you hear the sound of the harbor as she gets out into the harbor. This song could also be, and I think it was actually recorded in Reykjavik, as she, Reykjavik has a club culture as well, and she was definitely like loving being by the harbor. I mean, she lives by the harbor in Reykjavik, and I've been to Reykjavik, and a lot of it is by the harbor. It's kind of hard to ignore it. I mean, it's a big city, but it's also very small at the same time. And it's definitely something London does not have, so much of that quiet, peaceful moment in the big city, because Reykjavik is so much more about that contrast. And that segues beautifully into the song Like Someone in Love, which is also my favorite. I'm not entirely sure. I guess I would say this is my favorite song on debut. I've listed it before as such, but Venus as a Boy comes really close. It's hard to tell. This is a one jazz sort of influenced song. It is predominantly just a harp-laden, beautiful, schmaltzy ballad that she sings and croons in such a beautiful melodic way. I mean, one could argue it's one of the most straight-up melodic songs she has ever composed. Björk doesn't necessarily like to lean so heavily on traditional melodic structures, and this is one of the few times she is doing that, but it still feels fresh and original and so melancholy and beautiful. Lately, I find myself out gazing at stars, hearing guitars like someone in love. Sometimes the things I do astound me, mostly whenever you're around me. The key change there is so beautiful. Lately, I seem to walk as though I have wings, bump into things like someone I love. Each time I look at you, I'm limp as a glove and feeling like someone in love. It's such a Disney song in some ways. I can't help but sing the melody as I read the lyrics because it is so traditional, but I think it just fits the narrative of Björk actually being a bit idealistic as a youth and yearning for that fairy tale romance is part of being such an creative, idealistic person. And we realize once we open ourselves up to love how weak we are and how powerful it is. And, there's this sort of almost bittersweet delivery where she's acknowledging that she used to think love wasn't all that. She was like, I was so stoic about love. I felt like I would be unmoved by it. And then I met this guy and it all fell apart. And she's acknowledging that and sort of by the harbor, just sort of reflecting and taking it all in, basking in the feeling that's so new and exotic to her. You feel that youthful energy and that newfound discovery of what real heart, pain, and love is. And that's what this song is. It's her unabashed love song. So beautiful, such a highlight. But yet one of the few moments in her career that she ever gets quite like this. And the ambience around it, hearing the sounds of the street behind her and people walking by, it's so cinematic. It puts you in the moment so beautifully. Next, we have Big Time Sensuality. I can admit that this is an iconic song for what it did for sort of jazz, funk, acid house, dance music, but for me personally, this song is not necessarily a highlight. I just don't find it that memorable. It's interesting, the music video for sure. It's her very kind of spastically dancing on top of a taxi in presumably London or New York. I'm not entirely sure. It might have actually been filmed in New York because I know she was spending a lot of time in New York as well. And it has the energy of the city. And it is also, of course, about the lust and the love that comes from that energy. I can sense it. Something important is about to happen. It's coming up. It takes courage to enjoy it, the hardcore and the gentle. Big time sensuality. We just met, and I know I'm a bit too intimate, but something huge is coming up, and we're both included. Could you imagine writing that on a Valentine's? Something huge is coming up and we're both included. It's these sort of weird Björky kind of pickup lines that she uses on these like love songs, which are so much more kind of transparent about her sexual desires than a lot of people care to write about. She doesn't sugarcoat this. She talks about the lust. She talks about the sensuality unabashedly and in a very kind of euphoric, ecstatic way, which will give you the acid house vibes. I mean, the trippy sort of, I just took a lot of drugs sort of feel and rush of adrenaline that comes with songs like this. And that's what the song is a statement for. But it was also a very good molded pop song for radio for her that showed her diversity and her ability to work with Nellie Hopper to create something that really did feel distinct and unique and trend-setting for pop music. One Day is an interesting song. This is another highlight song for me. I love the sampling of the baby at the beginning. Now, I'm guessing that the sound of her the baby vocals are of her son Sindri, who was born in the early 90s. That is my assumption. I am not 100% sure on that. So please correct me in the comments if I am wrong. I could look it up, but I'm pretty sure that those baby sounds are of her son. And it's interesting because I was born literally 3 months before this album came out. And I always listen to One Day and I think, you know, I mean, I would have been a baby when this song came out, not necessarily when she was recording the album. I would have been a little too young for that. But I always think of my own, like, me being the baby. It's just really weird because it dates you in some ways. It's sort of, whenever I listen to this song, it reminds me that it was 1993 and it reminds me that I was just born, you know? It's kind of, I don't know, it's just always been a strange sort of relationship I have with it that only people who are born around that time will ever get with that. Anyway, so, and it's, again, so hard to believe it's been 25 years. I turned 25 in 1 month. This album has a little bit longer before it turns 25, and I am terrified to turn 25. You have no idea. But at the same time, I'm excited. I feel like it's a new page being turned. But One Day has this prophetic nature to it, speaking about one day it'll happen, one day it'll all make sense. And then there's these very playful, childlike lyrics, which I think are a lot inspired by, of course, the fact that she was a young mother at that point, and she was taking care of a child and reading him these stories, and, you know, the aeroplane floating around the volcano. It doesn't really make very much sense, but sometimes these sort of offbeat children fairy tales don't either. There's, again, that nice sort of percussive rhythmic backing to it. I just feel it's so, I mean, she sings I Can Feel It, and it's so rhythmic, so it's a little bit of a sensual melody. One day it'll blossom when you're ready. So important. I think she is basically reflecting on, you know, looking at a child and realizing all of their potential and how there's sort of this documentation of things to come. When you look at them and you think, what will they do? One day when they're ready, they'll be their fullest potential. And now, of course, I think a lot about that with me, considering I'm of age now and I'm of the same age as this song. So is this prophetic to my life? I can't help but feel like it is. Keep in mind, I never actually heard this song until 2012, so I was already almost 20 years old by the time I actually heard this song, so I didn't grow up with this song by any means. I'm a newer to Björk sort of artist. I only got into her around the biophilia era. Keep that in mind. I do love the horn section. Does it remind you of like a documentary from the 90s? I feel like it really does. It's such a dated sound, but it reminds me of, I don't know why, but it gives me a little bit like Magic School Bus meets like Reading Rainbow, PBS Kids. It's very strange, but I mean, again, it's a kid's song, or like an even older, you know, 80s sort of nature documentary showing like a bird flying, and it's like this It's just a very dated horn sound, and it's cute though. It's really playful. Aeroplane is an interesting song as it mixes what is considered jungle music or exotica. Exotica was a term I never was familiar with until this album in terms of music. And it features maracas, it features a lot of different kind of percussive instruments as a sort of backbone. And I think this song is a lot about her leaving Iceland to come to the UK as to become like, to make it in the music industry. Even though it is scripted as being about a love song. I cannot live peacefully without you for even a moment. I miss you terribly when you're away. He's away, this isn't right. I'm alone. I'm taking an airplane across the world to follow my heart. How come out of all of the people in the world, only one can make me complete? One word on the phone makes me happy. One touch directly makes me ecstatic. Oh, I mean, she's reflecting on, I guess, I mean, she had just had like a short-lived relationship and she moved to London and she's suddenly traveling all over the world. She's not on her tiny little, well, Iceland's not so tiny, but it is isolated and population-wise very tiny. Little island, and now she's seeing the great wide beyond, and she is, remembering the relationship that she had formed with her lover back in Iceland. And I think that that story kind of tells itself through the analogies that she sings about. Melodically, I don't find it as interesting. I just think what's so interesting is the use of all those exotic instruments that create sort of this world flair in the background. And I love, especially at the end, there's this sort of like Caribbean sort of dance. I'm not sure what instrument it is, but it's just very playful and fun. And the recording of bird calls, which we do hear distantly in the background, which of course harkens to what she will do in Utopia 25 years later. Come to Me is another highlight song. Like I said, it features those very beautiful Bollywood strings to create a very cinematic and sultry song, very minor key. You know I love you. It's an unabashedly prophetic, I'll take care of you, protect you, calm you down. You know that I adore you. You know that I love you. So don't make me say it. It would burst the bubble, break the charm. Come to me. Let's not make this harder than it is. Let's come together naturally. And I could understand as an introvert having wanting to people to come to you and not have to instigate everything yourself, because that is something that is so taxing to do as an introvert. I don't like having to make the first move, which sometimes you have to do, but sometimes it's the right to like sort of sit and wait, but you do feel that pull. And well, then we have Violently Happy. Now, Violently Happy is a pure technopop song. It's my least favorite song on this album, which some people might disagree. Again, a lot of people have varied opinions on all of these songs. For me, Violently Happy just doesn't seem to really go anywhere melodically, and again, that's a key thing for me. I appreciate the ecstatic exuberance of it as it is talking about a surge of energy, be it for better or for worse. That's why you put two juxtapositional phrases together. Violently Happy is a very good description for a specific attitude and emotion. I think we can all agree we've experienced it at some point in our lives. So I really give her chops for that. But as far as the actual song itself, it does feel a little bit the same thing. It feels repetitive and like it's not really like going anywhere. But the lyrics are, of course, gold as always. And I tip down to the shore, stand by the ocean, make it roar at me, and I roar back. Violently happy, come call me down before I get into trouble. Yeah, don't, don't let this run rampant for too long because I'll get myself into some major trouble. Since I met you, this small town hasn't got room for my big feelings. I feel bigger than this space. And I think we can all relate to that feeling. And again, maybe she's hearkening back to how she felt coming from like Reykjavik and moving to London. It's a very, again, like it speaks of an asylum. They dance, the music video shot by Jean-Baptiste Mondino dances frantically and chops their hair and plays with dolls. That frantic urgency that you feel is so strong. And it is about, like, she was living in Lake Reykjavik away from her lover, and that was so frustrating for her. And then finally, we have the closer, the anchor song. This, like the title, roots her back in her, by the harbor roots of growing up in Reykjavik, in Iceland. You hear the waves, you hear the ambiance, the seagulls, and you hear Oliver Lake on the saxophone playing a very smooth jazz melody with very little else in the background to accompany as she sings a sort of more kind of proverbial stanza structure about her roots being always in Iceland through and through no matter what happens. I live by the ocean, and during the night I dive into it, down to the bottom, underneath all currents, and drop my anchor. As this is where I'm staying, this is my home. So you may think you got to know me in the city, but there's more to me than meets the eye. Where my real home lies is on those craggy cliffs of Iceland, my home country, and with my family and with my childhood memories and the sense of wonder of nature that she is inspired by so much to write music. She wrote this song, you know, back in Iceland, way before she moved to London, and was just sort of, oh, I think I saw a thing where she was in a little church and she was coming up with a melody on like an organ or something. It just sort of simply came to her, and it's one of the first songs she really fully wrote for this album, and so it was really important it was included. So it really does kind of help tie in all of the autobiographical elements she's pulling together for this record and succinctly bookmark where she is and where she's coming from to move forward with Post and then further on with her career. Overall, Debut is a very solid debut record. I mean, it won a lot of applause and accolades for that. I do think that she builds on things better in Post. There's a little bit more nuance and a little bit of a different kind of exotic delivery to her voice that she finds a little stronger on Post. And of course, then with Homogenic, when she really discovers her bombast and her power as an actual singer-songwriter. But I do think that Debut is the foundation, and you can't ignore the foundation because it has to be strong to build up all the beauty and mystery around it. So let me know what you thought of this review. This is significant as this is finally the last official studio album of Björk's that I will have reviewed on this channel to now be all caught up with where we are in 2018. That does not mean I am done talking about her though. I have to do a video, and I will be doing this soon, of my favorite sort of B-side songs that she has, her unreleased material, as well as her non-album singles. She's got a lot of them. She's got 25 years worth of material that I want to cover there. So I'm going to sort of break down my favorites and talk about them. So that will be the next Björk video I do. So I hope you enjoyed. Please give this video a like and subscribe if you did. Any Björk fans, please check out my channel. I have reviewed every single official studio album of hers so far now, so they'll be all linked in the description below. And like I said, please subscribe to this channel if you want to see more, as I review a lot of different artists, a lot of artists that have been inspired by Björk, and she's one of my favorites, so it's important to me that she's sort of one of these artists I get through reviewing first, as she's sort of so integral into my interest in music. I hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.